Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Morning. Call the committee to order, and we thank everyone for being with us. After more than 30 years of thinking and talking about tax reform, Congress produced and passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. On December 22nd of last year, President Trump signed this historic tax package into law. Today, the unemployment rate is at historic lows. New claims for unemployment benefits have recently plunged, and equipment purchases are on the rise. The economy as a whole is recording very positive marks. Beyond macroeconomic data trends, this tax law will be judged on its direct impact on the ground. From a business perspective, optimism, it's really sky high. That's a very good thing, and for small businesses, it's a great thing. According to the NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business, their most recent Small Business Optimism Survey recorded the 6th highest mark in history. When it comes to problems facing small businesses, the NFIB survey showed that small firms listing taxes as a major problem has fallen considerably. It used to be way up there on the list, but now people think that we finally dealt with it. Doesn't mean we're done, but we've certainly headed in the right direction as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs bill. Additionally, NFIB released a separate survey specifically looking at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. According to that report, more than 85% of all small business owners believe that the tax reform package will produce positive results. In another report, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and MetLife joined forces and found that small business owners were forecasting continued growth as the year progresses. I ask unanimous consent to enter these three surveys into the record, and without objection, so ordered. While reports capture the overall temperature of the industry, I want to hear directly from those that are on the ground, and that's the folks sitting before us here this morning. That's what we're here to discuss today: the reactions, the impact, and the effects of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act on small businesses all across the country. And I think we all look forward to hearing from each witness about the business environment in their community and how they've impacted been impacted from the tax reform package. Additionally, I think we're interested in hearing where your companies were a year ago and where they are today as a result of the tax cut. From Ohio to Mississippi to Utah, small businesses are transforming communities and neighborhoods. They're responsible for the creation of 2 out of every 3 new jobs in the private sector. Small businesses are. And as we continue to study the impact of tax reform, it's important to hear from those employing nearly half of the private sector workforce. Simply put, the economy runs on small businesses. Before we move forward in this hearing, I want to take this time to especially thank all the witnesses for being with us here today. I know that you're sacrificing time and energy away from your business to testify before us, and we really do appreciate that. So thank you for joining with us, and I would now like to yield to the ranking member for her opening statement, Ms. Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little more than 7 months ago, President Trump signed into law a partisan Republican tax bill. Unfortunately, it has become increasingly clear that the lion's share of benefits from this law will flow disproportionately to the largest corporations and the very wealthy. At the same time, small businesses who could have benefited from well-crafted, targeted tax reform are largely left behind. Some small firms are seeing, at best, marginal benefits. Many others have yet to see many meaningful advantage at all. A long-standing challenge for small businesses has been managing tax code complexity. Complying with intricate and frequently changing tax rules imposes a significant burden on small enterprises, many of whom do not have in-house tax professionals. Instead, these small firms need to spend time and money on outside counsels, and tax preparers. We have heard time and again from small businesses that this uncertainty and unpredictability imposes additional costs for them, making it difficult, if not impossible, to plan. Unfortunately, the Trump tax law did little to alleviate these twin problems of uncertainty and complexity. Instead, it has fueled more confusion and uncertainty. For instance, as of today, an overworked, underfunded IRS has yet not released Section 199A pass-through regulations. Another example is the promise that small businesses will be able to file their taxes on a piece of paper the size of a postcard. As always, the devil is in the details. Recently leaked IRS documents suggest there will be additional paperwork and worksheets small businesses will need to navigate. For those firms that think they will be able to capitalize on the new tax laws through restructuring, they can expect an expensive and time-consuming process that may eclipse any benefits. While benefits for Main Street small businesses are minimal at best, the Trump tax law will be a boon to Wall Street, big companies, and the extraordinarily wealthy. Millionaires will receive an average tax cut of nearly $70,000 this year, more than 100 times the size of the average tax cut for families earning less than $150,000 annually. Not only does this cast doubt on how large a tax cut most entrepreneurs will receive, but it also suggests most locally owned businesses will not see much secondary stimulative economic benefit. Unlike the very wealthy, when working and middle-class families get a tax cut, they are most likely to spend it quickly at local Main Street businesses, spurring customer demand for small businesses' goods and services. Simply put, the cost of tax reform has been put on the backs of small employers and working families. They will see any rate reduction expire at the end of 2025, while corporate rate deductions continue permanently. On top of it all, the Trump tax changes will mean the federal deficit grows by trillions of dollars. So much for fiscal conservancy. Already, the tax plan jeopardizes health coverage for 13 million Americans, and these future deficit pressures could imperil Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Most small business owners I know want to take care of their employees, ultimately gutting the ACA and vital social safety net programs imposes indirect costs on responsible entrepreneurs who want to do right by their employees. The fact is, real bipartisan tax reform that helps small businesses, American families, and it is fiscally responsible could have been achieved if Republicans had worked across the aisle. Unfortunately, the Trump tax plan was pushed through rapidly with the support of just one party, aimed at achieving a political goal, not good policy. It is my hope that in the future, Congress can work together on more responsible tax solutions that help small firms and strengthen our economy for the long term. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and I'll take just a moment to, before introducing our panel, to explain our lighting system and timing things. We operate under the 5-minute rule, and each of you will have 5 minutes to testify. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on for a minute to let you know that you should be wrapping up, and then the red light will come on letting you know your 5 minutes is up, and we'd ask that you stay within that time if at all possible. And I would now like to yield to the gentleman from Mississippi, who's the chairman of the House Administration Committee, Mr. Harper, in order to introduce our first witness here this morning.
Thank you, Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez, for allowing me the opportunity to participate briefly in this committee's hearing this morning in order to introduce my constituent and friend, Mr. Wetland Treppendahl. Wetland is the owner of Treppendahl Superfoods in Woodville, Mississippi, a town of just over 1,000 people and one of our state's oldest communities, having been incorporated in 1811, 6 years before Mississippi became a state. While the first Treppendahl did not arrive in Woodville until almost 100 years later, the Treppendahl family name today is readily recognized throughout southwest Mississippi and immediately identified with Woodville and Wilkinson County. The Treppendahl family history is the classic American success story. In 1903, as a 24-year-old, Carl Treppendahl was sent from Denmark to New Orleans wearing a shipping tag pinned to his coat that said, "Send me to Woodville, Mississippi. I do not read or speak English." He had been promised a job as a bookkeeper by a fellow Danish immigrant, but unfortunately that business failed shortly after Carl immigrated to the United States. Carl was left in Woodville with nothing, so he got busy. He opened a small store where he bought and sold everything from hardware and dry goods to lumber and fertilizer. In 1924, he added a grocery store in downtown Woodville to his enterprises. Carl's son, Adolph, took over operation of the business, which eventually passed to his son and our witness today, Wetland Treppendahl Jr. Wetland is assisted in the daily operation of the family's full-service grocery store by a son and daughter, Adolph Wetland Treppendahl III and Susan Treppendahl LeBlanc. Mr. Treppendahl is testifying today on behalf of the National Grocers Association, and I'd like to welcome him today to this hearing and to Washington, D.C. on behalf of the House of Representatives. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish I could stay longer, but I have to go and chair a matter over in the Committee on House Administration. Thank you for allowing me to introduce Mr. Treppendahl.
Thank you very much for that, and you are excused. We appreciate you being here. And our next witness, I would recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for the purpose of introducing our second witness.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, and I would also like to thank Ranking Member Valenquez and the rest of the committee for the opportunity to introduce one of our witnesses who is from my hometown. Tibby, great to see you again, and thank you for traveling all the way from the great state of South Carolina to join us today in our talk about tax reform and what it means for small businesses, particularly yours. I've known Tibby for quite some time now, and I've not only found a smart businessman, but also a great friend. If you do not know, Tibby is the CEO of his company, All Pro Solutions. All Pro Solutions is a very small business in my hometown of Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is just south of Charlotte, North Carolina. 26 years ago, after fleeing from communist Romania and coming to America, Tibby started All Pro Solutions and has turned it from a small startup to a thriving small business. 10 years ago, Tibby and his family moved to South Carolina. They have enjoyed every minute since, and he attributes his move to South Carolina not only as a personal decision for him and his family, but a business decision where he would be able to grow his family-run business, which he did. Since I've known Tibby, I've grown to know him as an honest, hardworking, and dedicated family man, businessman, and friend. I look forward to his testimony, and he is a true success story. When we went through his business, he really was excited about his business and what he does. I welcome his wife here today, and Tibby, again, thank you for taking the time to come, and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, and I'll introduce our next witness, who is Gary Ellerhorst, who actually is from my district in the great state of Ohio, and about a half hour outside the city of Cincinnati, in Harrison, Ohio, where he's the Chief Executive Officer and President of Crown Plastics Company. Crown Plastics is an innovator and manufacturer of advanced plastics and polymers that has locations in both Ohio and internationally. With impact resistance characteristics, Crown Plastics materials are helping advance the shipping and transportation industry, as well as the ski and snowboard markets. The company was founded back in 1972 by Mr. Ellerhorst's father, Robert Ellerhorst. Today, the company is led by Gary Ellerhorst, who has over 40 years of experience with Crown Plastics. In addition to his responsibilities there, Mr. Ellerhorst is past president of Main Street Harrison and the Greater Harrison Chamber of Commerce. And we thank you for taking time away from the business, and we welcome you here today. And I would now like to recognize our ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for the purpose of introducing our fourth and final witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Davis Sensman, the founder of Davis Law Office in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her law firm employs 5 people and serves a roster of over 800 Minnesota-based small business clients. Ms. Sensman graduated from Buckner University, magna cum laude from Mitchell Hamline School of Law. She serves on federal nonprofits and hails from Brooklyn, New York. She's testifying today on behalf of the Main Street Alliance, a national network of small business owners. I want to welcome you and all the witnesses. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back, and if committee members have opening statements, I would ask that they be submitted for the record. And we'll now turn to our witnesses. Mr. Treppendahl, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Sir. Good morning. Thank you to Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez, and to the members of the small business community for the opportunity to testify and share my family business story. My name is Wetland Treppendahl, and I'm the fourth-generation retailer and owner of Treppendahl Superfoods in Woodville, Mississippi. My family business originally opened in the 1800s and later expanded to the grocery store that we own and operate and have been since 1924. Treppendahl's is a full-service grocery store offering special items, a deli, a bakery, and premium meats. My daughter assists me in the operation and plans to take over the business someday. I am testifying on behalf of the National Grocers Association, the National Trade Association representing the retailers and wholesalers that comprise of the independent sector of the supermarket industry. Woodville is a 1 square mile town of 1,200 people, and Treppendahl's is the largest employer with 50 employees. We are the only grocery store in town where more than 60% of our customers are eligible for the SNAP benefit and would face significant difficulties assessing fresh fruits and vegetables if not for our store. The new tax law has had an immediate impact on my business's ability to invest in our store and community. We have upgraded and replaced 12 doors of frozen food section, providing work for our local refrigeration company and allowing us to expand our selection of frozen food and save on energy cost. We are also in the process of upgrading our check lanes, which are 18 years old. Tax reform has allowed me to provide full-time employees with raises. The estate tax has also been a concern of our business. Supermarkets are somewhat unique in that most of our assets are non-liquid, tied up in property, inventory, fixtures, and equipment. Paying a big estate tax could mean going into debt or selling off part of the company. The new tax law's double exempt threshold for the estate tax has reduced fear I have about the future of my business, as it is to be passed through generations. The permanency for this provision would assure me that our store will remain in business for years to come. The 20% pass-through deduction is a positive for my business, as we are organized as an S corporation, but long-term certainty for this provision and rate parity with C corporations is desired for the future, since we must compete with chain stores. Another important aspect to the tax reform is 100% bonus depreciation qualified improvement properties. As a supermarket owner, I must replace expensive equipment over time, as well as upgrade shelving units, flooring, ceiling tile, wiring. These items carry high price tags, and the ability to write them off fully and immediately gives me the confidence to invest in my store. However, a drafting error in the new tax law prevents me from being eligible for the benefits, and I urge Congress to fix this issue as soon as possible. Thanks to the new tax law, I have received renewed confidence in my business. As Congress looks to improve the tax law, I urge you to make permanent pro-growth policies for small businesses that would remove uncertainty, so I can continue to invest in my employees, my business, and my community for years to come. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Yes, sir.
Vicente, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. I'm honored for the opportunity to testify before the committee today on how the Tax Cut and Job Act help small businesses. My name is Tiberiu Sente, CEO of All Pro Solutions, located in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm a legal immigrant and I'm a proud U.S. citizen. I escaped from Romania in 1989, and after 2 years of vetting, I received political asylum for U.S. After 5 years of working, 3 jobs, I opened my own company, bought my own house, sent my kids to good colleges in California. And then after 18 years there, we left California and found our dream state, South Carolina, where we enjoy family value, good business opportunities, and a lower cost of living. All Pro Solutions was created in 1996. We are a manufacturer of disk publisher, archiving systems, and digital service. We sell our equipment all over the world, including the government. When we started the company, we were 2 people, and now we are 10. Recently, we had 2. Until now, we were 8. Now we are 10, and we expect to hire even more in the end of the year. Because the Tax Cut and Job Act, the optimism in the small business community is very high. I'm a member of your county Chamber of Commerce, and after each meeting, I notice optimism of our community entrepreneurs growing higher and higher. The tax reduction is huge, and the extra in the company's pocket is a big amount of money a small company can do a lot with. Until last year, many companies, including us, didn't want to spend their money, but now, because of this big tax cut, any entrepreneur can see the opportunity to invest in its company with the goal to make more money and for its employees also. It's a very good feeling. All Pro Solutions forecast for the end of this year and beginning of the next increase 4 times comparing to the last period of the year. Because of that, we already started to buy new inventory, build our equipment. Last year, we built 50 units, and this year we plan to build between 150 and 185 units. Because of this extra number of products, we already begin to expand our company, and in the end, when everything is done, we will hire between 2 and maybe even 4 people. One of the other good signs on how the Tax Cut and Job Act works can be seen through jobs advertising on Craigslist. I used to advertise each year, and I used to receive 200, 300 resumes, and now we receive just 20, 30. It's clear why the economy is booming, people have jobs, and the job market starts to be one huge issue to hire for us. Therefore, we have to increase the employees' wages, and also we have to, when we hire, we have to offer them more than usually just to be able to catch them. Another big opportunity for us, arisen because of the tax cut, is to try to bring in US Chinese manufacturers that already sell their product here. To manufacture their product here could be a big advantage for them comparing to make them in China, and which is add some expenses. And also the transporting can be one huge amount. And beside that, I believe we even can have lower cost to build products to them than what they have now there, and also it's more safe. We already have a company interested. They visit us, and we are in the 3rd phase of dealing with them. Company name is Olupa Filtration, a manufacturer of high-precision filter. I hope we will be able to partner with them, and I'm really happy to bring jobs from companies from China to US. There should be something special for us. Reduction in the individual income tax is one of the big help for the employees, and a lower tax by an average of $334 per family per year, which would be 2.2%, put more money in their pocket. Expanding the child tax credit, which is, I think, is big too, from $1,000 to $2,000, and preserving the mortgage interest deduction. This is one very big, good thing to preserve it. So the people, if they buy, it's good to be able to be helped. Because all of these wonderful results of the Tax Cut and Job Act, you can see many happy faces in streets, more people shopping our malls, and eating in the restaurants. Whatever people say, what I know is that money brings happiness. Thank you for listening to me, and I will be pleased to answer any question you may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ellerhorst, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, Chairman Shabbat and Ranking Member Velasquez, good to see you both again. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to testify. In 1972, my father started Crown Plastics Company. After working several years as a second-shift machine operator while attending Xavier University, I came on full-time at Crown in 1978. In the past 40 years, I have experienced just about every level of financial difficulty and success, due both to general economic as well as market-specific conditions. What I've come to learn is that although a singular situation or event can bring a solid, successful business to its knees, for example, streaming video's complete annihilation of Blockbuster Video or a regulatory impact on small community banks, it takes a combination of specific market and economic conditions to fuel significant profitable growth. These include internal aspects, such as a skilled workforce, product value and innovation, wages and benefits, external items such as general economy, global competition, regulation, taxation, and availability to capital, and other more nebulous things such as corporate and consumer confidence and a future economic environment. Although each of these aspects play an important individual role on overall economic performance, it is a combination of these that create the synergistic rocket fuel of a moving economy. Separately, Mentos will freshen your breath and Diet Coke will quench your thirst, but together in the proper environment, they are explosive. Either of them alone won't do it, nor could you replace them with Tic Tacs or Diet Pepsi and get the same result. So trying to evaluate the impact of the recent tax bill contextually removed from the other contributing economic influences, which combine to generate the overall economic picture, can be difficult and potentially misleading. I will, to the best of my ability, provide my perspective as to how the bill both directly and, more importantly, in conjunction with other economic and policy-based contributors, is impacting my business. The attached exhibit is a drastically simplified illustration of the direct impact on our tax liability. As an S-Corp, under the new bill, Crown shareholders would be eligible for the 20% pass-through tax deduction. However, we also lose the 9% domestic production activity tax deduction that was eliminated. Based on $1 million in taxable income, which is about where we budgeted for 2018, Crown would see a net decrease of just over $64,000 in shareholder tax liability. As with most S corporations, we commit to distributing to the shareholders enough to cover their federal and state tax liabilities. So the result is that the company would be able to reduce its distributions by the $64,000 and still provide our shareholders the funds to meet their tax requirements. Now, that may not sound like a big deal for a $14 million company, but in reality, it is. Over the past 10 years, we have invested over $5 million in new equipment, process improvements, and technological updates, and have paid out little to nothing to our shareholders. Even if we decided to just pay out the pre-tax bill numbers, it would provide the opportunity for the shareholders to keep their portion of the tax reduction and use it for themselves and their families. And as a privately held company, our shareholders are just regular folks like myself, many of them the children of initial investors who have inherited the stock from their parents. We could also choose to use the money to pay down debt, further reducing interest costs. $64,000 a year would also provide us with the capability to service well over $1 million in additional loans for further investing in our business, which is very timely as we just signed a contract on an additional building adjacent to ours, which with upgrades will cost us about $1.1 million. The tax savings will allow us to cover this additional expense without adversely affecting our current cash flow, which is the most critical factor to a growing business. A key impact for us is with regards to our medical insurance benefits. We continue to pay 100% of the premiums for our employees' high-deductible HSA medical insurance policies, as well as 40% of the deductible on the back side. This has been a commitment of ours to our employees, and over the past 10 years, we have worked hard with our insurance broker to do whatever we could to maintain that benefit through increased deductibles, changing carriers, and sponsoring employee wellness programs. We're at a point where one more large increase in premium costs could force us to start requiring the employees to contribute to the program. But with the new tax bill, not only can we maintain the status quo for 2019, but for many years to come. Why? Because when we realize the impact of a booming economy, along with the returns from recent investments we have made in the business, we expect to double profits next year, which means $64,000 becomes $128,000 in tax savings, and even more in 2020. Another aspect that is potentially even more impactful than the tax rate itself is the ability to accelerate depreciation of our investments into our company. Outside the purchase of the new facility, we have budgeted capital expenditures of $800,000 for 2018. Although the net impact over time is a wash, the ability to expense these investments rather than depreciating them over 5 to 7 years will provide us with an additional $200,000 of cash in 2018, which again is often the most critical item for a growing company. With increased receivables, inventory, and work in process, a growing business requires significant cash. So in closing, the recent tax reduction in and of itself will have a positive impact on our employees and our business in 2018 and beyond. But when augmented by the reduction in regulation, and most importantly, the hugely positive outlook by business leaders and consumers, which started the day after the 2016 election, the resulting booming economy takes that positive impact of the tax bill and increases it exponentially. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sensman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to testify today examining how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has affected real Main Street small businesses. My name is Davis Sensman, and I am a member of Main Street Alliance, a national network of over 30,000 small business owners. I've owned a small business law firm for more than 8 years, currently employ 5 people, and have a roster of over 800 business clients, many of whom I have consulted with about the TCJA. The vast majority of those clients, like others across the country, are not seeing consequential gains from the TCJA and its 20% pass-through deduction. It's nice that some of the other testifiers here today are, but they are most certainly the exception and not the rule. And from what they offered as concerns about their businesses, I wonder how many Americans would actually classify them as small. At last measurement by the SBA, the median income for self-employed individuals who own pass-throughs was $49,204 a year. These businesses are the bodegas, auto mechanics, and small farmers who would have to pay more to an attorney like me or an accountant to figure out the new law than they would ever gain from tax cuts. The Act's small business provisions were also needlessly confusing. The TCJA turned the tax treatment of pass-through entities completely on its head, and now 2 businesses making the same amount of money may have completely different tax situations. As Ranking Member Velasquez mentioned, we sit here today, July 25th, still without any IRS regulations about what specifically will constitute things like qualified business income or specified trades, making it nearly impossible for these businesses to do any tax planning. My law partners and I sit in a very privileged position as attorneys, and yet we still spent nearly $2,500 with our accountant on tax planning for 2018, a cost which could have doubled if we also had to hire legal advisors. In future years, once we've recouped the costs of our accountants, the TCJA will likely result in our having a slightly smaller tax burden. But first and foremost, we didn't need it, and it certainly won't be enough to hire more staff. And we're not alone. A recent poll by Businesses for Responsible Tax Reform found that 69% of small business owners don't plan on hiring a new employee because of the new tax law. While many Main Street businesses won't feel benefits from the TCJA, they will feel a hit. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the TCJA will slash government revenue by nearly $2 trillion. As many predicted, some of your colleagues are using this deficit increase to justify deep cuts to Social Security, Medicare, infrastructure, and other vital purposes that public services that small business owners and our communities rely on. Many Republicans were ardent opponents of any increase in the federal deficit under President Obama, but now remain silent in the face of a burgeoning deficit due to a new tax law. The Tax Policy Center estimates that a typical small business owners, those folks with the median yearly income of $49,204, will experience a tax cut of roughly $500 in 2018. You'd be hard-pressed to find any Minnesota small business owner who would rather have $500 in hand now than an assurance that they can access heating assistance if their business is down in one of our tough Minnesota winters, or Minnesota Care, our state Medicaid program, if they need it in the future. The CBO also found that the TCJA's repeal of the individual mandate will cause 13 million Americans to lose access to health care and health insurance premiums to climb. I started my firm in 2010, the first year that the provisions of the Affordable Care Act took effect, at a time when large corporations in Minnesota were still reducing their workforces from the last recession. And do you know what I spent most of my time doing in those early months? Creating LLCs and drafting agreements for folks who had been laid off from Minnesota's largest companies, but who had decided that they would take the risk to start their own business simply because they were no longer reliant on a large company to provide them health insurance. I'd like to close my testimony with a story about an early U.S. small business owner, Henry Ford. Due to the Model T's success and an innovative assembly line, Ford had a capital surplus of $60 million by 1916. He planned to use the money to employ more workers, make his cars more affordable for his employees, and help them build their lives, which is a lot of the promises we heard about the TCJA. Unfortunately, Ford had two shareholders, John and Horace Dodge, who sued him, arguing that the purpose of the company is to maximize shareholder profits, not to benefit the community. The court agreed, holding that management's primary duty in a corporation is to maximize shareholder wealth. Dodge v. Ford makes clear that any attempt to stimulate the economy and create jobs by making sure that businesses have more money will run right into the issue that those businesses are legally obligated to use surplus money to benefit their shareholders through things such as stock buybacks, which have increased by $615 billion since the passage of this bill, and not for the greater good. For the vast majority of small business owners, the confusing outcome of the TCJA has been of little benefit, especially when compared with a good affordable healthcare system, sufficient retirement funds, and high-quality jobs that sustain a strong customer base. I urge Congress to re-examine this entire bill and reconsider the methods used. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, and we'll begin our questions now, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Let me ask Mr. Treppendahl, Ms. Sente, and Mr. Ellerhorst, how many employees do each of you have? Let's just go down, starting. 50? 8 and a couple part-time? 2 part-time? Mr. Eller?
53 here and 20 in our international manufacturing facility.
Okay. And I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the SBA, Small Business Administration's size standards that determine whether business should be considered small, and let the record show that all 3 businesses before us indicate that they are small according to the size standards of the SBA, generally 500 or fewer employees, and they're also within as far as the gross revenues, without objection, so ordered. And the same 3 witnesses, let me ask you this.
Gentlemen,
I'd be happy to yield.
I just want to ask the Chairman, if you got that in your hand for the benefit of the committee, what the gross receipt number is that is used to measure a small business.
It's 32.5 million under that, and
500 employees.
Yes, 500
Thank you,
employees.
Mr. Chairman.
So we're well about 10% approximately of what's considered a small business in America. And when we talk about there being 29 million approximately small businesses in America, that's the numbers within which we're working. The 3 gentlemen that I just asked the question is, compared to last year at this time, do you feel your business is better off today with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act being in place? Mr. Treppendahl?
Yes, sir. I do. I think that we have to work as hard or harder, but I'm investing back in my company because I think that we're on the right track. I wouldn't ask my daughter to come back and work with me. She has an accounting degree, and I wouldn't ask her to come back and work with me if I didn't. Let me explain. When you say a small grocery store, we're a small grocery store on a scale of the big people. Our grocery, we had a one-day meat sale, and on our one-day meat sale, we did really good. We sold over $50,000 that one day. Now, you realize I went to work at 4:30 in the morning, and I got home at 8 o'clock that night. And of that $50,000, our profit was 1% to 2%. So that's $500 we made for that. So any kind of break or any kind of cut that can help small business, and I'm saying small business, we've got 1,200 people in our town, and it's 1 mile square. We're little bitty in the scope of the big boys. But yes, I I'm 69 years old. I'd be retiring if I didn't have faith.
Thank you. Mr. Sente, are you better off today as a result of the tax cuts and jobs?
Yes, and even I feel better.
Thank you.
So it's this is one huge optimism. It's very general good feeling where you go and you talk with people and they have companies, how positive they see. Usually the entrepreneurs, they have to go first, not after, or it cannot be followers. So once we see the opportunity, our job is to go and spend and do stuff and try to do stuff, because it's one good backup, you can make 50% profit, and it's one chain. Even some criticize the big companies, I love them. Why? Because if they spend money, they're gonna buy stuff from me, I have to make stuff, and I have to buy stuff from others. And this, by the way, it's one cycle. It's not just small companies, not big companies, we are related. I have my forecast 80% big companies gonna buy stuff from me. And what they did, on the past, they purchased one unit, now I have 5, 6, 7, which is between 5,000, it can be 25, 30,000. It's a big difference. Mm-hmm. So it's one chain, which I love that. It's not just a small company. It's one good example, that is why I'm here. But I had the chance to be here, but it's not just that. Even the big corporations, they have one huge influence over us and help us because they buy stuff from me.
Thank you.
I buy stuff from them.
Yeah, I'm gonna run out of time, so I want to get to Mr. Miller.
Absolutely.
Mr. Miller, let me mention one thing.
Yes.
Are you better? And then secondly, I think you mentioned that you're in a group of 37 other small businesses, and what are you hearing, and what kind of businesses are those, and what are you hearing from them too?
Absolutely better off, and will continue to be better off as time goes. I'm a member of Vistage CEO Group and another chamber.
What was the name of that again?
Vistage, it used to be Tech, and another CEO roundtable with total of 26 other businesses, and they range anywhere from banking to restaurants, complete wide gamut, and there's not a single one, whether they like the president or not, that will not say that they absolutely are benefiting from the tax bill.
Okay, thank you.
Not a one.
My time's expired. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we held a subcommittee hearing here, entrepreneurial development, and we have a table and a number of witnesses like this. 3 members that were Republican witnesses and 1 a Democratic witness. That day, when they were asked by a member of the other side if the Republican tax bill benefited them, each one of them replied in the negative. I wasn't here, it was in the subcommittee, but I watched the proceedings. So a postcard filing form was touted as the game changer of tax reform. This is the card that Speaker Ryan used to show that it's going to be easy. You know, a small business person will be able to file their taxes on a postcard like this. Yet, it is becoming more apparent that this is not just reality, especially for small businesses. In fact, this is the draft forms that we have seen. I have to get up because it's this long. So after seeing the draft forms, would you consider filing your own taxes since it is so much easier to file now, Ms. Sensman?
No. When I've consulted with my accountants, they have said, here is our best guess as to how things will be interpreted by the IRS because we don't have any regulations yet. And this law in no way made anything simpler. It completely flipped the way that LLCs and S corporations are taxed, so 2 businesses making the same amount of money could have widely differing tax results. So no, I would certainly not do my own taxes nor advise any of my clients to do their own taxes.
More than 90% of taxpayers now e-file, which also helps a cash-strapped IRS process return more efficiently. Does it make sense that we are moving backwards in that respect?
No, it certainly does not. One of the things that happens with the IRS is that if you have any changes or need to communicate any things that stand out from one tax year to the other, you can't e-file. We couldn't e-file last year because we were switching from being an S corporation back to a partnership. And so I would imagine that most accountants who are concerned about how taxes will be viewed or construed will err on the side of caution, because that's what accountants do, and they will paper file rather than e-file to be able to send in notes.
Every time we held hearings in this committee about taxes, there were two areas that the witnesses raised, small businesses: complexity and uncertainty. This chart, prepared by the Democratic Ways and Means staff, shows the steps to calculate the pass-through provision. So my question to you is, but by the way, my colleague, Congressman Doggett, said it's pass-through purgatory. Ms. Sensman, can you explain some of the unknowns and confusion surrounding Section 199A?
Absolutely. Section 199A is the new pass-through 20% deduction that was added to the bill after there was some backlash and some pushback from organizations, including the NFIB. What it basically says is that pass-through entities will have this 20% deduction, but then it goes on to cut into that will only be on their qualified business income, that will only be for income under a certain amount, that will only be in specified trades, which are very broadly defined. You will have a phase out. And so the uncertainty of how these defined terms will be interpreted, the uncertainty of whether a business owner's, whether what they're bringing home is qualified business income or not, all of these things are brand new uncertainties that they never had to deal with before. Not that it was non-complex before, but these are all uncertainties bred from the new Section 199A.
Thank you. I see my time is up.
Okay. Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa is recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this hearing, the testimony of each one of you. I'd like to start out with Mr. Treppendahl. The introduction that was delivered by Mr. Harper was interesting to me, and I didn't commit it all well enough to memory. But what I wanted to ask you first, and it's a little off topic, was your grandfather that was his name was tagged and the address was tagged inside his jacket? Did I hear that right?
Yes, sir.
And that was 1904.
Yes, sir.
And how old was he when that happened?
24.
And he was sent from?
From Denmark. He came from Denmark to New Orleans and caught the train from New Orleans with the shipping tag, said, ship me to Woodville, Mississippi. I do not read or write English, and when he got up here, I don't know if anybody knows Jerry Clower, but that was Jerry Clower that would tell that story. But when he got to Woodville, it was, the business was out, the gentleman had closed his business. It was a neighbor of his from Denmark. Mm-hmm. And so Grandpa had to do a little bit of everything, and he's, we had kind of every kind of store, and then finally we ended up with a grocery store.
Was he went by ship from Denmark to New Orleans?
He went from Denmark to Liverpool, England, and caught a boat in Liverpool, England, and came in straight to New Orleans.
With a shipping tag inside his jacket.
And shipping tag, it was on his lapel.
That's not the only story like that I've heard. The reason I focus on it is because I've heard a good number of them.
Yes, sir.
Including a former member of Congress, Tom Tangreto's grandfather, who was shipped across the continent and ended up in Colorado with a tag on his jacket, and orphan trains that went across this country. And the destiny of family after family was changed by these pretty exciting stories of people that are faced with adversity, but they don't know that at the time. It's opportunity to them.
Yes,
and how would he know, or he wouldn't be able to know at this day what you've accomplished. I'm also impressed that a town of 1,200 people, and I've got a couple of hometowns in the 1,100 and the 800 category, and I'm looking at the grocery stores in there. 50 people employed in a grocery store that serves 1,200 people is a pretty good-sized employment list.
Yes, sir, it is. And, we're still a complete grocery store, but we still carry out. You don't have to carry your groceries when you come to Treppendahl, so if you get busy up here, you can come on down and we'll carry your groceries out.
You're a marketer, too. But you must reach out quite a long ways outside the community to have 50 employees serving in it.
Woodville is, in the southwest corner of Mississippi, and we have small surrounding towns that
they come to.
And we're 8 miles from the Louisiana line, so we catch some people from Louisiana too.
Okay, and I didn't catch in your testimony, did you have a hard number on what this tax cut does to your company, for your company?
Not a hard number, but I can tell you in our store, in the last, since 3.5 years, we've paid over $466,000 in taxes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Trippendahl. And I go to Mr. Ellerhorst because you had a hard number. And I heard the testimony here that you guys are, the three of you are the exceptions, not the rule on beneficiaries of this tax policy. What about your associates? Your number was $64,000 annually on about $1 million of net income. Did I hear that right?
Yes, sir. That was from our accountants. That
Yeah.
they told us that's what we could expect the difference to be, putting everything in. And it only took them about 10 minutes to give me that number. So it wasn't, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of confusion or.
And of your friends and associates that are business people as well, are you hearing any? What are you hearing?
Gentlemen, I have a gentleman sent me an email. We definitely feel the tax changes will enable us to free cash that can be used to grow the business. Additional jobs have been on the fence, adding more now going through. Additionally, the increase in deductions allow for new equipment buys, have made equipment expansions easier to justify. Finally, the project activity from our customer base has rocketed this year. Capacity being moved, expansions being pushed through. That's from a member of my Vistage group who owns a manufacturing business in Cincinnati.
And one of you testified as to the regulatory relief that's part of all this too. I know that the President Trump, as a candidate, said that for every new regulation, he'd eliminate 2 old ones, and they gave us a report, I think it was in February of this year, that for every new regulation, they eliminated 22 old ones. That was pretty interesting to me, but then my first question was, why in the world did we have any new regulations? I wanted to also, I think that's pretty well established, and I'd say that the business I started in 1975, my oldest son owns that completely today, and they don't even ask me for advice. I'd have to pay them to give them some, but they're doing okay, and they run it through the software package of their accountant as well, and his numbers look very, very good. I didn't give him a thought, actually, on this tax piece, but they're very, very good, and I'm hearing it a lot of places. I wanted to turn back to Mr. Treppendahl and ask a quick question about child labor laws within the grocery store business. Can these young people that are going to be 18 years old tomorrow, they're only 17 today, can they walk into the cooler and haul
Yes,
some of that $50,000 worth of meat out of there?
Can
they even go in the cooler at age 17?
No, they're not. They can't go in the cooler, or the deli, or any place where saws or anything like that are. Now, as far as out there in the store itself, yes, sir.
They can do dry goods, but they can't do produce or meat.
They can do produce.
But can they go in the cooler to get it?
No, sir.
You have to get it out for them. Then
yes,
they
sir.
can carry it the rest of the way. And then can they mow the lawn outside the store?
I don't have them doing that.
You can't do that either.
No,
I'll just
sir.
make this point sometime, Mr. Chairman. I think we ought to have a hearing in this committee about the child labor laws that keep the young people, let's say 16 years old, that get into a car and drive anywhere in the country they want to go, stay up as late as they want to, can't work after 7 on a school night, and they can't do these silly things here and many others, and they're not learning the work ethic that they need to learn.
Mr. King, you got a good point.
And so that's my request, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your support of that idea. I appreciate all of you, and I yield back balance my time.
Suggestion. The gentleman's time's expired, and the chair would just note for the record, when we've been talking about the postcard, in general, we're not referring to that postcard for businesses to file their taxes on. It's the vast majority of individual taxpayers. Now, businesses are probably still going to have to file business forms, and they might be complicated, and wealthy individuals are probably going to itemize in many instances too. But it's the folks who got their standard deduction doubled and the child tax credit doubled that are less likely to have to file a complicated tax form now, that could use the postcard in many instances.
Let's roll the videotape.
Which videotape?
Speaker Ryan holding a postcard.
Yeah, but he's not talking about Procter & Gamble that's headquartered in my district or these folks. They're talking about individuals, you know.
He talk about simplicity.
Which is the vast majority
That's
of
what
people.
he talk about. And that I show is not simplicity.
I don't think anybody said that small businesses were going to have their tax forms dramatically simplified, or that big corporations were, or that wealthy people were. You know, they still have to get tax accountants oftentimes, and and that sort of thing. But in any event, we can agree to disagree. And the gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Ms. Sensman, thank you for being here today. In addition to my position on the Small Business Committee, I'm also fortunate to be a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over tax issues. In fact, I joined the committee just last year as Republicans began to tout the grand promises of the highly anticipated tax plan, and they repeatedly said that the plan would boost economic growth, increase wages, and reduce complexity. Well, I did get a close-up view of how this law came to be. It was a very rushed and hasty process. It created more loopholes, complexity, and increased compliance costs for small businesses in particular. And you've seen this famous postcard. Yes, actually, I was in the committee, and that postcard was held up over and over again as the promise for what this tax plan would be. And instead, just let's take one. You know, Ms. Velasquez showed this as the tax purgatory process for the pass-through element of the small business plan. And I actually went and tried to go through the different loopholes here. You have to go through each phase and determine where you are in this. And example, just one of these loopholes: determine taxpayers' combined qualified business income. I'll just read it. CQBI equals the sum of the amounts determined under 199A B2A, 20% of QBI for each qualifying trade or business, plus 20% of qualified writ dividends and qualified publicly traded partnership income of the taxpayer for the tax year. That's one loophole. So that does not sound like simplicity on a postcard to me. And so there is actually a very serious question about the fate following small businesses. And first of all, it is about the estimated tax withholding. I mean, you really have to be sure that you have the correct estimated amount or you pay the penalty. So has the uncertainty surrounding the pass-through provision created difficulties for small businesses trying to estimate their quarterly filings of business taxes? I'm very concerned that some small businesses will ultimately under-withhold due to the confusion and be subject to late payment penalties.
Yes, that's a very real concern. As you've mentioned, if you under-withhold and don't pay the IRS enough for the earnings that you made, you can face a penalty. Those penalties can incur interest if you can't pay them all at once. There's no way to know until we have regulations from the IRS how they will define something like qualified business income or specified trades and industries. If you've ever seen a hard copy of the IRS code, there's 2 to 3 books that are the code, and there's 7 to 8 books that are the regulations. Tax accountants, tax attorneys, business attorneys don't really spend a lot of time in the code. They spend a lot of time in the regulations because it often doesn't matter what the code says. It matters how the IRS is going to interpret it. And so you do have business owners right now who are making their quarterly estimated payments as best they can, but certainly may end up finding out that they thought they were eligible for the 20% QBI deduction, but that they weren't, and that they now owe 20% more in income taxes.
And that's a pretty penny there. Yep. In fact, are more small businesses investing in tax professionals since the passage of the tax law? Do your small business clients feel that the costs associated with claiming the deduction will ultimately be worth it for their businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure you have. There are certainly small businesses that cannot afford tax advice and will never take advantage of that 20%. They'll never know that they have it so they will overpay. But certainly more of the small businesses we work with who had a fairly simple, straightforward tax situation before. LLCs and pass-throughs don't have a separate tax form. Just to clarify what they were talking about with forms, they don't have their own form. It's just a schedule on the individual's form. So if the individual were to have a postcard, I suppose the business owner should have a postcard with a schedule at the very most. But they certainly are having to consult with tax advisors to just tell them how to understand whether they even have a change or can expect a change.
And how much do you think this would cost?
I mean, for us, there are 3 of us and not a very large business, and we paid nearly $1,000 each. I mean, I think that you could see, for those business owners who make a median of $49,000 a year, I think you could see, up to 5 to 10% of their income being spent just to figure out what they're going to owe and what they need to withhold.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I just want to thank each one of you for coming up, taking your time to testify. You're in the small business. I mean, you're running a business. Most of the critics have never run a small business of the tax plan or really of what we face. I'm a small business owner. I run a development company. You're in it. Congressman Shabbat played college football. He was in it. He can describe what it means to play college football. So you need to be in you need to be in the real world of what we're doing rather than just saying it didn't work. My first question, Mr. Treppendahl, you mentioned I think your quote was, if these tax cuts were to be reversed, I would not feel comfortable reinvesting in my store. Are there certain provisions in the tax reform that lead you to say this, or is it the entire package that you're thinking about?
Well, in discussing with my accountant, and as I said, we took off we added 12 doors of frozen food, or 12, and that we're able to take off right now. We can put our money to use, and we think it would be very advantageous to continue. He also said that his old saying, he said, you make the money and I'll worry about the taxes, but he says we've got to worry about this. And I think that anything we can get to help us, and as we said, 1% and 2% in the grocery business is not a whole lot of profit. So if we can save a little bit here and a little bit there, it gives me a little bit of confidence to go ahead and spend the money and put the money back into the store, in the community, employ the people. I think it will help us.
So in your statement, if you mentioned if the tax cuts were reversed, you would not feel comfortable reinvesting?
I would still, not completely. I just feel better now.
Okay, great. Mr. Sente, your testimony, you state, until last year, many companies, including us, didn't want to spend their money. Why was this the case, and what about over-regulation for the last 8 years that have been reversed now? Has that played a part in your success?
My understanding, that is one big picture regarding the tax cut, and we small companies and maybe the big companies too would like more to be free than have a bunch of regulations and don't be able to move freely just because there are so many paperwork. And these regulations remind me from communist countries where I'm coming from. That was one big problem, to have lots of regulations and people they were not able to do nothing. So for us, I enjoyed that, and I really like this kind of freedom and less regulation than more regulations.
Okay. Next question, Mr. Ellenhorst. You're from Harrison, Ohio. How's the business climate in your city and state, and are folks more optimistic than they used to be?
Extremely, for many, many reasons. One being the economy, and on an individual basis, the tax cut is just part of that, but in general, the economy. I would like to say I hope I'm a better businessman than Mr. Chairman Shabbat was a football player.
He was pretty good.
That being said,
Point of personal privilege. We went to rival high schools, and I think Gary played at Elder, and I played at LaSalle, and so in any event.
Yes. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your.
Yeah. I think the overall is very, very high. I think there's a lot of pent-up things that have just kind of been released with a lot of the promises that have been kept since the election as far as reducing regulations and things. I know we lost a relationship we were a big fish in a small pond with a very small local bank, but due to Dodd-Frank, we had a banker in our CEO group that said if you aren't X size, you will not be able to survive the additional oversight that's been required. And so we're now with a decent bank, but again, that whole situation was disastrous in our banking, and now there's much more capital involved, and It's just interesting, all this talk about unwritten rules and regulations where Dodd-Frank just tied up the whole banking, and I don't think by the time we started dismantling it, I still don't think the regulations were written. So there's a real example of someone of locking up the banks because they still had no idea what the rules were going to be. So just thought it'd be worth bringing it up.
Thank God we're cutting most of those, trying
yes.
to on Dodd-Frank.
Yes, sir.
I want to compliment each one of you for staying active in your local Chamber of Commerce. You need to keep the pressure on all politicians that we need to spend less money on government and give it back to the taxpayer who is earning it. So thank you for taking the time, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez, and thank you for your testimony. In the 80s, the Republicans touted trickle-down economics, claiming that cutting corporate taxes would allow big businesses to invest in workers and expand the economy. Instead, income inequality drastically expanded, and now the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities point to the pass-throughs benefiting the wealthiest households significantly more than the rest of the country. Ms. Sensman, how would the continuation of trickle-down economics help small business this time around?
I don't know that it would. I don't know that it would. You know, we as I pointed out with the kind of the seminal case in how why corporations exist, they exist to bring money to their shareholders. That is their primary goal. And as a shareholder, you can bring a shareholder suit if you think that your the management is not doing that. I don't think that trickle-down economics is going to work. I think there are studies that have shown that 61% of the benefit through this new pass-through deduction will go to the wealthiest 1%, and that 4% of it will go to the bottom 2/3 of earners who earn money through pass-throughs. So that's a 15-to-1 ratio of going to the top 1% versus the bottom 2/3 of owners. I mean, it really, no matter your economic theory, the end result is that businesses exist to make money for the shareholders, not to pay it out as Mr. Ford was hoping to do. To do that, there are some states where you can organize as a benefit corporation, but your traditional corporations and pass-through entities are designed to make money for the business and for the owners.
Thank you. As you know, the tax law will cost a total of $1.9 trillion over the next 10 years, a deficit that's harmful to our society as a whole. But I'm particularly concerned about how the outrageous deficit hurts our nation's youth. I'm disappointed that the tax law does nothing to really address their needs, like providing families with greater child tax credits or dependent caregivers. So, Ms. Sessman, if Congress passed laws to address education rather than giving corporate tax breaks, how would the nation's small businesses be impacted?
Well, our youth will become the employees of our small businesses, and they already are and will continue to be the customers of our small businesses. And so the more we can invest in young people, such as folks who Mr. King wanted to work in the freezers, the more educated they are, the more we've invested in them, the more that they have what they need to survive, the more we will have a stronger workforce in our businesses. And so education is a key component for small business owners because you need an educated, well-funded educational workforce so that they can be your future employees, your future customers, and the future owners of businesses that will do business with you.
Thank you. Mr. Ellerhurst, in your written testimony, you alluded to the fact that it's not just the tax law helping your business, it's also the general healthy state of the economy. We've been hearing from small businesses in a wide variety of industries that the tariffs brought on by trade war will wipe out any tax reform benefit. So as a manufacturer in China, is there any concern that you have that your industry will be impacted?
I do not fear that at this point, in my opinion. I would rather I would rather intellectually analyze the results rather than to emotionally respond to the process. I do believe this is a process. I do not believe there will be a tax war. I believe as a businessman, our president is very well aware of the negatives of a tax war. He also believes that we are in a very strong position to take this stance, and that the net result will be a reduction of tariffs on our goods going to countries that I testified maybe 10 years ago on free trade agreements, and I believe in those, but they've got to be fair. I mean, we can't say, okay, we'll reduce all of our barriers and you keep yours. I think that is what the president is after, and that's what he stated he's after. I do not believe in a trade war, but I do not believe the president believes in a trade war either. But we are in a position of strength with our economy now. Now is the time to negotiate from a position of strength. And I do believe the results are going to be, eventually, a reduction in tariffs on U.S.-made goods into some of these other countries.
Thank you for your opinion, sir. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, and thank you to our panelists for being here today. And I'd be remiss if I didn't compliment my colleague, Ms. Adams, on her hat today. Absolutely outstanding. Mr. Sente, I believe you said in your testimony or something about being optimistic.
Oh, yeah.
Which reminds me of my favorite definition of entrepreneurs, of which I am one, that we go from one failure to the next with the greatest of enthusiasm.
That is our job.
I just want to address a couple things before I question. I hear over and over again that tax cuts cost our government. And I look at this, first of all, letting people keep more of the money that they earned is not a cost to the federal government, unless you believe all money belongs to the federal government and 435 people sitting here in suits decide how much of your money you get to keep. Secondly, tax cuts add to our debt. Totally and patently untrue. 1964, John F. Kennedy taxes were cut. He was assassinated in 63. His tax cuts were passed in 64. Huge tax cuts. What happened to federal tax revenues in the next 10 years? They doubled. 1986, Ronald Reagan cut taxes. Big tax cut in 86, last one we've had. And what happened to tax revenues of the federal government? They doubled over the next 10 years. In fact, a 0.5% increase, 0.5% increase in gross domestic product, GDP, growth rate, over a 10-year period produces $1.5 trillion in federal revenue. 0.5% produces $1.5 trillion in revenue. Our GDP growth rate under President Obama, 2008 to 2016, averaged 1.8% growth, okay? 1.8%. The last 5 quarters, we've averaged 3.1%. I don't want to bore you with statistics, but that's greater than 0.5%. So these tax cuts and the rollback in regulations on businesses and the tax cuts to Americans is working. We're producing a higher GDP growth rate, and it is not costing the federal government a penny. In fact, it would be reducing our deficit right now. It would be reducing our deficit right now. Federal tax revenues to our government are at all-time record high. All-time record high. Never before has this government taken more money out of the pockets of Americans. Never before. So as Ronald Reagan said in the 1980s, we don't have large deficits because we tax too little. Reagan said, we have large deficits because we spend too much. So I just wanted to make that clear, that the tax cuts are going to reduce our deficit. They're not going to increase the federal deficit. Mr. Sente, in your testimony you said until last year, many companies, including us, didn't want to spend their money. And I'm an entrepreneur, I get that. But can you explain that? Why wouldn't small businesses until last year not want to invest their money?
Well, once the deregulation is a big step, the second, maybe before then, is the tax cut. And once you can save from whatever you're doing one extra 15%, you can afford, if you are in business, an entrepreneur, you have to go and risk for that because that is the sign you have to do that, the step. And then once this optimism is on me, on you, and on others, will be one chain. And then you're going to decide to buy something from me, not because my accent, because I have something. I'm going to buy something from him, and it will be one cycle. Therefore, you're going to do more, I'm going to do more, he's going to do more. For some reason, after 6 months, you're going to say, wow, we are doing well, almost everybody. So I really think the tax cut give us that huge optimism, and this optimism work for all these entrepreneurs who really want to do something. And I just want to tell you something. Somebody here said if somebody in small business, they're going to have $500 profit, they prefer to go have some help from the government. I escaped from Romania, from communist country. I want to tell you my story is different. I'm happy for that $500 if I can do it. And if I cannot make $500, I close the company. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to work for you.
Well said. Well said. I'd like to ask one of the entrepreneurs here with the little time I have remaining. Oftentimes here in Washington, I hear about one-time stimulus packages. So it's a one-time spending versus a 10-year tax cut program that you as business people can plan on is going to be there for 10 years versus a one-time stimulus. Give me your thoughts on that and how that impacts your uncertainty.
Businesses rely on what consistency and knowing what the future is going to be in order to make investments. Now, I know politicians like to change their terms from expenditures. Now they're called investments. Well, an investment requires a certain outlay with an ROI over a period of time. So it's very easy to take that investment and say, oh, that's an expense. No, if it's truly an investment, then you don't take that number in and of itself and say, oh, it's going to hit the deficit like this. You have to wait to see what the return on investment is. You will get much greater return on investment over time on a much more consistent, steady, stable, that we can plan on. And so if they really want to count them as investments, then give us a chance to give you some return on investment before we start talking about what it's going to cost.
The gentleman's time has expired, so Mr. Treppendahl, if you can answer very quickly.
I agree with him.
Okay.
I like stability. I like to know what's going on. I don't like change.
Okay. Thank you. The gentleman's time has
yield back.
expired. Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, who's a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ellenhost, I want to deal with something you said a few minutes ago.
Yes, sir.
On the words of semantics about investment versus spending. You would consider infrastructure what? What would you consider infrastructure?
That would be an investment.
Okay. Then there's a direct connection between infrastructure and economic growth. Would you not agree with that?
There is an impact, whether it's dollar for dollar, but there absolutely is. There absolutely is.
Right,
yes.
Because you have to transport whatever you have, may it be on road, ships, airlines. You have to transport it, right? Because whatever product you have, it has to be transported somewhere, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's the only differ I have with your comment about what you say politicians about spending and investment. Because specifically, I don't think you build roads or bridges. Am I correct?
I do not.
Okay. So you're like a supplier to government, since you're in the plastics, to the entity called government so it can invest in roads and bridges, right?
Yes, I'm also an investor since my tax money is being
Correct.
Yes,
Correct. I totally, and
yes,
I thank you. I thank you
yes,
for what you do, because I come from that little state next to Ohio, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And, you know, we know a lot about, you know, in Meadville and Erie and all those places. And as a matter of fact, I started a company that was called Fame. And the purpose was to deal with, we had a company called Crown Cork and Seal, a packaging company. You familiar with that?
I've heard the name.
So that's why I'm saying I don't think this should be an either or. I don't really think this is Democrat and Republican if you talk about the economy.
Right. Yes, sir.
That's what I'm saying. But
Yes,
I'm
sir.
just concerned that sort of the view, like, you know, Democrats think this and Republicans think this, but the name of the game is to grow the economy.
Yes, sir. And my comment was not saying that no expenditures are investments.
Okay.
It's just that all expenditures aren't investments, and that the understanding of an investment is there's an outlay and an expected time of return.
Correct. But
So,
you know, Dwight Eisenhower was the one who led the charge for the roads.
Yes, sir. The interstate
Based on
system.
national security,
Yes,
what
sir.
he did, right? And
Yes,
we
sir.
didn't have that. Obviously, as you take Route 76 across Pennsylvania going into Ohio or Route 80, we need that, right? That's
Absolutely,
a connection.
sir. Absolutely.
I just figured that I wanted to add that.
Yes, sir.
That point in. I want to go to. I got a minute. I want to go to. And one other thing you said, which I think psychologically, I heard you say you wanted to deal in specifics, particularly around the area of trade.
Yes, sir.
And I heard you say, and this is not the Agriculture Committee, I'm on the Ag Committee.
Yes, sir.
When the president, and I know you're not here to defend the president, so I want to make that very clear. That's not your role. You know, when the president on one hand says what he says about the tariff situations, and then on the other hand kind of give a $12 billion initiative, right?
Yes, sir.
On one hand, he's saying $12 billion for the farmers, and then on the other hand, he's saying don't really want to be in a trade war. So I don't understand, you know, the basis.
Well, I believe that in the process, it's not going to be a painless process like anything else.
Okay.
That the trade is going to create some pain in some areas short term. And what the president is saying is take some of the revenues that are generated from the taxes to help out those who are being impacted until the situation is resolved to hopefully we eliminate or reduce all barriers, at which point in time there is no trade war, but there's no longer need for bolstering. But a short-term assistance to those being most effectively or most, I guess, greatly impacted during the process, I believe is what he's trying to accomplish.
Well, you put it good if you can figure out what he says. But I'm just,
That's right. Well,
that's
my
put you on
opinion.
that spot. I know.
That's right.
Ms. Sesman, small firms often have the fewest resources to spend on accountants to identify potential tax breaks. How does this complexity in the new tax law expand advantages for firms that can devote resources to identify tax loopholes?
Yeah, that's certainly a concern. Small companies are generally just at the mercy of how much their accountant knows. Right. And if they are dealing with a 1 or 2 person accounting firm, it's unlikely that they may know. You know, I think uncertainty, as folks here have said, is the enemy of any business. You want to be able to plan. Larger firms will be able to employ larger teams and pay more money to accountants, and will likely be able to take advantage of the many loopholes that are available in the law, and smaller firms just will not have that ability.
Okay. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Snyder, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member. I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing. It's an important issue. Small business, obviously, is the driver of our economy. So many small businesses are working just to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis, but in doing so, they hire people, they produce products, they help make our community stronger. Mr. Ellenhurst, like you, I was a member of Vistage. I understand the value that those connections bring. I just want to be clear on a couple things. Mr. Treppendahl, you may have said this, but I believe, is your business organized as a pass-through entity?
Okay, you're going to have.
Are you organized as a pass-through? Are you an S-corp or LLC?
I'm at an S-corp.
S-corp. So the income that shows on your business is blended with your personal income. And
Yes,
Mr. Zenti, how about you? Is your business a pass-through entity or C-corp?
We are C.
You are C-corp?
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Ellenhurst, you said in your testimony you guys are an S-corp.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Sensman, you're a law firm, a little bit different, a partnership, but also I assume a pass-through entity. And I know when I had my business, it was pass-through, and the money we invested in our business was a function of the decisions we were making as a family. And it has a real big impact. And impacts on our personal finances could impact our business just as much as the other way around. I have a firm in my district. It's called Hell's Kitchen. It's a small business, catering business that's been in business since 1985. Its owner, David Boris, actually has testified in this committee, but he'd be the first to share with you through his work. He's been able to create hundreds of jobs over the years that they've been in business. They are providing jobs not just for the people who work for the company, but also people who provide services and products to the company. Now, Illinois is one of the states that is being hammered by the tax bill because of the elimination of the state and local tax deduction. And David shares that because of that elimination, the new law is not putting any more dollars in his business, in his pocket, not investing in his business. Whatever benefits he might be getting from the pass-through are being wiped out by the elimination of the SALT deduction. And as a result, despite the Republican talking points, he's not going to hire any more people. He's not going to be able to buy any more equipment. In fact, he may, and many of the businesses in my community are talking about this, they may be left in a hole not an opportunity. So, Ms. Sensman, I'll ask you, how common from your members, how common is the experience I just described?
In states where you have high state and local taxes, and that has been capped, I think that's not an uncommon experience. There were other things that were taken away in the tax bill, or things that must now be taxed, such as parking benefits for your employees. That I'm not, there wasn't. I couldn't give a good explanation to clients about why this has a change and this doesn't. But I think that you're right that if it's not, a state like yours where the state and local tax cap is affecting business owners, it's paying someone to help them figure out what exactly is going on, or just taking time out of their day when they can't be, if they're someone who charges by the hour who provides a service, when they can't be providing that service because they're filling out new I-9s for their employees and filling out new withholding forms because their employees have different deductions now. I think that all of that adds up to eat into any benefit, any savings they would see through that complicated pass-through 20% deduction.
So, yeah, and it was mentioned in the conversations earlier today, businesses thrive on stability. They thrive on a ability to look forward and say, I believe that if I make this investment today, Mr. Elmhurst, you talked about this, if I make an investment today, I'm making that investment because I believe I'm going to get a return. It's not guaranteed. We wake up early in the morning before dawn, we'll go to home at the end of the day, and are going to fight and struggle for that $500 profit each day. But if you do it every day, hopefully you get rewarded for your hard work. I think one of the challenges, and we talked a little bit earlier about the process that we went through on this last tax cut. It was not a formal process. There were no hearings. In fact, there were 0 hearings, 0 discussions about what would be the broader implications of tax reform. We need tax reform. We need to make sure as a country we are deciding and having a debate where should we be investing, whether, as Mr. Evans said, investing in infrastructure so that we can invent things here, make things here, and literally ship them around the world to allow companies to prosper. But if we have this partisan activities like we saw last year, then the pendulum's just going to swing back and forth and create the uncertainty that as business people we all worry about. So I hope as we go forward there will be a way to work across the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, and everyone in between, to make sure that we have investments in our future, in our children, in our infrastructure, in the business opportunities that will ensure the United States can't just compete on the global stage, but we can lead and win and ensure our economy is growing for everybody. But it has to be done in a way that is sensible, done in a way that balances, and done in a way that takes into consideration all of the impacts, as we talked about here, the states that are affected by the punitive elimination of that SALT deduction are not benefiting from this bill. They are really struggling. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chairman would note that he agrees with the gentleman that it would definitely be better to work together in a bipartisan manner when that's possible. In the tax cut bill, it didn't look like that was possible, and I would think that I would have liked it perhaps when we were dealing with health care, that the Affordable Care Act or the Obamacare, whichever terminology one prefers, that there would have been a little bipartisanship there, but didn't happen in either case.
Yeah, let's agree we have to do on everything. I wasn't here for the health care debate. I was here for this tax debate, and we reached out, and I think we can work together.
And I wasn't either because I lost in 2008, so when they passed that, I was going to say horrible thing, but I don't want to comment on that. I wasn't here during that time.
No, but we see when bills do pass, working together, as we've done in this committee.
And we're a much better institution since you and I are here. Right?
Agreed.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. I think our last interrogator to this morning and now into this afternoon will be the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology. Recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. I've been in business before I came here for the past 36 years, and so I understand what tax breaks mean to small businesses. And from my perspective, just coming here, it was not an issue with me whether it's Democrat or Republican. It was just what's best for the business, which I thought everyone should be concerned about, but sometimes it's not like that here. in Washington. It might be who really get credit, but my concern in dealing with a lot of small businesses, really always like to get relief because they are concerned about their employees, they're concerned about the bottom line, they're concerned about escalating costs in different areas, whether it's intangible taxes or whatever you have to pay. So my question would be to all of you is how can we reform, if there is reform, and listen to some of you on the tax package that we passed last year to reduce the level of complexity in our tax codes for small business. And the reason why I say that is in Florida, we had to pay the intangible tax, and it used to cost more money for a small business to pay the CPA to fill out the form for the intangible tax. And so, I filed legislation to really kind of change that, because they were saying you need to pay intangible, but you pay more money than it was for the intangible tax. And so if we have that same kind of situation coming up, I would like to know what can we do as in Congress to alleviate some of the complexity that would go along with the tax package, and everyone can comment on it.
Well, I think stability, and I think uniformity would be, we kind of put out here and really not sure what's going to happen, whether it's with the tax code or the tax era. I don't think we're just really sure which way we're going. I operate a lot better. I don't like surprises. And I think that if we can just have it where what we're doing, and we know from day in to day out, week in to week out. I'm sure there's somebody in here that when they were a younger boy worked in a grocery store. And you know what it is working in a grocery store. It's pushing those cans and putting rice on the shelf and then getting it out the door and getting it out. And it's not just a lot of profit in it. It's a lot of hard work and a lot of fun. And we have fun with our employees. We classify ourselves as a family. And it's because I better be. I'm with my employees more than I am with my own family, so it better be.
If I could answer your question on what you all can do, my perspective, and I know a perspective of a lot of small business people and Americans in general, our founding fathers set up our dual-party system based on different means to a common end. In my opinion, in the last decade or so, we have lost the common end. It seems like we are now at an ongoing philosophical battle about what kind of country we're going to be. Are we going to be a democratic republic? Are we going to be a social democracy and things? And we have completely divided along party lines, which is a shame. And that's why there cannot be any cooperation, because now you're talking about people giving up core beliefs of what they think is the right thing to do. So if Congress can do one thing, is to get together and decide what our country is going to be, and then get back to that. I am a conservative constitutionalist, but I realize I need the opinion of every liberal individual in this country as well. I'm not always right. I'm not the smartest person in the room. But the only way we are going to ever solve the issues is to really come up with a common goal and decide how, in our differing opinions, is the best way to get there. And until we get that back, it's just going to be a partisan, absolutely break. And so I would plead, as most of us in America are, still Congress to please decide on what it is that we can work together on and what our goals are going to be, because until we do that, we're going to be stuck with exactly what we have today.
And I would just say, the four of us certainly don't have the answers, but neither do all of you. I would ask that you consult with experts, and you would have studies like the ones that are coming out now before you take any action, not in the months after. I would ask that you look to people who do this all the time instead of trying to ram something through in 2 months without a single hearing. I think that that could only provide you more insight into what things will, what effect they'll have.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
I just want to say about working in a grocery store, as long as I was bagging and getting tips, I was okay. When they moved me to produce, I didn't want to do produce. I wanted to get those tips. Are you back?
The gentleman yields back. We want to thank the panel this morning and now this afternoon. I think all four did an excellent job in kind of explaining their points of view and helping this committee on both sides to deal with this very important issue, which is the tax code. And did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act have a positive impact on the economy, or negative, or a combination thereof? And as Mr. Ellerhurst, as you mentioned, I mean, we do need to hear each other. And this is one committee where we actually do that. We tend to work in a very bipartisan manner. Last week we passed 8 bills, all of which were bipartisan, had Republican and Democratic co-sponsors. And so this committee operates that way. And although we don't always agree on everything, like that darn postcard that Ms. Velasquez was talking about there. But in any event, we listen and we're respectful. So again, thank you all for continuing in that line that we try to follow here. And I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record without objection. So ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. Good job.